His hour has arrived. The highest-ranking soldier in all of Germany has come to talk with the public. He's here to speak about the big picture, about peace and war.
Dieses K-Wort, das hatten wir doch verdrängt.
That very word, war. We've pushed it aside. We didn't want it anymore. Over 30 years of peace, has that become our new norm? What do you think? Or to put it another way, how strong are you? Are you ready for war? Could you wage war? Can we wage war?
In a time of change, Carsten Breuer is to prepare Germany's armed forces, the Bundeswehr, for war. Does he have Germany on his side? What is his role in it all, between all the talk of war and the top-secret details?
Today, the biggest threat we face is Russia. We're no longer fully at peace, but not yet fully at war.
For 9 months, we shadowed the Inspector General of Germany's armed forces. All our questions were permitted. Even if the answers provided were sometimes sparse, there were moments of rare insight.
He's the bridge between politics and the troops. He's a key figure for me, especially in military matters. He's my most important advisor.
It falls to him to set the priorities, to say exactly what we'll do and what we won't.
Ultimately, that means protecting lives. It's why the role of Inspector General is so fundamental.
A highly sensitive mission to southern Lebanon. Carsten Breuer is visiting German soldiers there.
Take off.
His focus is Germany's defense, but the Bundeswehr participates in peaceful missions as well.
Everything's interconnected now. Soldiers from North Korea are fighting in Ukraine. Weapons are being ferried back and forth. Russia's a player in the Middle East too. There's nothing left that's not somehow involved. I believe we're standing on the brink of a new world order.
This is the first time in history that Germany's highest-ranking soldier has had a camera following him to this extent. Is the new strategy one of transparency? From the harbor in Cyprus, an inflatable brings him to a German Navy frigate. Overnight, they travel on into Lebanese territory. It's December 2024. A ceasefire between Hezbollah and the Israeli army has been in place for just a few days. The Bundeswehr has been deployed on the Israeli border. They're a long way from home. Carsten Breuer wants to hear how his soldiers at the UN base are doing. He served in Kosovo and Afghanistan himself.
How many people do you have here now?
Currently 42 again. There's usually 50 here in Lebanon.
Right.
We have decent transport, all protected, so we can move when we need to. That's typical.
Yes.
Someone wanting to head home to their village.
Wherever I go, I try to make it clear that deploying soldiers can also mean putting your own health, even your life, at risk. As a society, we simply have to be aware of that.
And are we?
I think we need to keep working at that. We've essentially outsourced our security for years. We kept saying, someone else will do it. With the external threats we're now seeing in Germany, in Europe, NATO, globally, we need to take much more responsibility for our own security.
Security and defense, back on the table. Many in Germany are conflicted. What might this new era bring? A morning briefing at the Ministry of Defense. Every day, the staff brief the Inspector General on security. Mounting conflicts, outright war, incidents within Germany. It's all on the rise.
We have two focal points abroad, General, Ukraine and the Middle East. In Ukraine, a rocket attack on a clinic in Kryvyi Rih last night. In the Middle East, the ceasefire in southern Lebanon is largely holding. Israel is firming up its buffer zone in Syria.
Here in Germany, General, yesterday you saw the report on suspected sabotages over the past weeks. We're working through the questions you had. I'll brief you on that again later. Yesterday, though, we had what we suspect was another drone incident. And last night we had a bomb threat at a munitions depot in the southwest. We followed procedure, and it doesn't appear to have been a serious threat.
All right, but stay vigilant, especially with things as they are now.
Multiple incidences of sabotage on warships, drones flying over military installations. Concern about espionage and sabotage is high. It seems the unknown perpetrators dumped loose metal into the warship's machinery.
Wiring on board was cut through. Security agencies have also identified drones that may be of military origin.
We're expecting more overflights every day.
Russia, of course, must also be considered.
Uncertainty is effective, isn't it? You can't protect everything. In a society like ours, organized around freedom, it simply doesn't work. You'll always have vulnerabilities all over the place. It's built in.
Russia operates in that gray zone. They're fully aware that for Western states, reacting is so difficult. With an open military attack, everyone would know what to do. But if you have a drone flying around somewhere, it's not clear whose it was, who you have to action against, even who's responsible. It's ultimately a way for Russia to weaken the Western states.
Breuer is receiving his Swedish counterpart at the Ministry of Defense's Berlin headquarters. Sweden, concerned about Russian aggression, joined NATO in 2024. The two defense ministers are in agreement. Russian sabotage is part of a broader strategy. Intelligence has suggested that within a few years, Russia could be in a position to attack NATO. General Breuer drew headlines when he pointed to 1 year in particular.
We have to be war ready by 2029. We must assume that we could be attacked in that year. No one is saying that will definitely happen, but it's a real possibility.
You can debate whether it'll really be 2029. It's a focus date. It's give or take. Our task is to make sure the armed forces, society, and industry are prepared for action in such a way that Russia's calculations go, an attack isn't worth it. The cost outweighs the gains Moscow wants.
2029. Should the date also send a signal at home? Germany's government and military are hoping to shift opinion within the country. The Ministry of Defense's message, Germany must be war ready. It's an old military term that Breuer and German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius have re-injected into the public debate.
We need to be war ready by 2029. We must become war ready. We must be resilient. We have to become war ready. I know it sounds harsh.
What do you think now?
We were using that term at the same time because we were both convinced the issues needed more attention. That's why we chose that term. It shook people up and it drew criticism. Then, both at once, we began using the term more cautiously. Our intention wasn't to frighten or irritate anyone, but to raise awareness. We succeeded at that.
Now, public awareness is certainly heightened on drone sightings, cyber attacks, airspace violations, mostly attributed to Russia, and acts of sabotage in international waters.
Cables damaged, pipelines destroyed. In the Baltic Sea, incidents involving Russia's so-called shadow fleet are on the rise. A power struggle is playing out on the Baltic Sea. Today, NATO has responded.
NATO's chiefs of defense are meeting in Brussels. NATO has deployed warships to the Baltic Sea to observe Russian freighters. Germany isn't the only place experiencing a shift in perspective.
Russian hostile actions against our own countries are accelerating, with cyber attacks, assassination attempts, acts of sabotage and more. We used to call this hybrid, but these are destabilization actions and campaigns. Russia is hard at work to try to weaken our democracies and chip away at our freedom. It's time to shift to a wartime mindset.
NATO wants to prevent further sabotage with increased presence in the Baltic Sea.
In areas where data cables, power lines, or pipelines run along the seabed.
At least 10 vessels plus reconnaissance aircraft, satellites and drones.
Germany also plans to send the Navy.
What counts for me is that we now have eyes and ears on the Baltic Sea. Now we can counter the hybrid attacks with operational measures.
People around Putin in Russia perceive the West as weak. They say, look, they're not responding. We simply cannot reinforce that perception. To do so would be to encourage a military confrontation.
But is Putin really already planning an attack? The intelligence the Inspector General bases his decision upon is classified. For him, though, it all points to one conclusion. Germany is already in a conflict with Russia. NATO is a defensive alliance. In your view, are we already in a situation where we need to defend ourselves against Russia?
Right now, we're in a hybrid state. You could clearly say that we're a state that is no longer fully in peacetime, but also not yet fully at war. We tend to think in boxes: peace, crisis, war. We match our responses to those boxes. Russia's take on war is completely different. It's a continuum.
If you ask, what goals has Russia declared? What have they done in recent years? Then you have to acknowledge that Russia's actions are revisionist, meaning it tries to shift borders. They're imperialist, meaning Russia's seeking to expand its sphere of influence. The question is how we can ensure that we can live in peace, both here, in Europe, and in Ukraine.
Peace in Europe. For the longest time, that was guaranteed mainly by the United States. At the latest since President Trump's return to the Oval Office, that safety is no longer a given.
America, who guaranteed security for Germany and Europe for decades, is pulling ever more away from the old continent. Is the era of European security at an end? That's the question at the Munich Security Conference about to be held here.
You're about to meet the U.S. Joint Chief of Staff. What will you say?
I don't believe I'll really have to tell him much. We grew up very similarly, raised with the military. I know from many conversations that he sees the importance of a unified, shoulder-to-shoulder stance with NATO.
You seem to view the situation more calmly from the military perspective. Aren't we currently at our most vulnerable?
Our problem is time. I believe what's happening now is that we're caught in a moment when certain wake-up calls are already being heard. We're now seeing how other external conditions are suddenly coming into play. That concerns me a little.
For years, experts have been predicting that the United States would continue to turn its gaze away from Europe. Is that happening to a greater extent now under President Trump? An extreme scenario could be the U.S. completely withdrawing from European security.
When it comes to the United States' role in European security, things are pretty alarming right now. When we look at the rhetoric, there's enormous cause for concern. The question naturally arises, can we still count on the U.S. to protect us?
The EU relies in part upon NATO, but the possibility of a European army is also up for discussion. Under President Trump, there's no guarantee that the U.S. will continue to be a reliable transatlantic partner.
Please welcome Vice President J.D. Vance.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
I can only interpret that as meaning the transatlantic relationship is at a crossroads. We don't know which way that will go. Of course, there's also no way for Putin to know what Trump will do. No one can really read Trump. It's easy to imagine that if Putin wanted to challenge NATO, he'd do that while Donald Trump was around.
Everything actually hinges on NATO unity. Any kind of fracture there would give an adversary like Putin at least one advantage. It could even mean he's achieved the first part of his objective.
Repercussions of the Vice President's speech are felt for a long time. A few days after the Munich Security Conference, Trump suddenly dismisses Breuer's American counterpart, General Brown. Tumultuous times.
The European focus shouldn't be the U.S. is leaving, we have to do more. It should be Russia wants to redraw borders, Russia's willing to wage war. Since the global security situation is generally breaking down, we need to be able to credibly provide deterrence of our own.
3 days after the security conference, the Inspector General is traveling to Kyiv. This shift in U.S. policy is being felt especially strongly in Ukraine. On the same day, Russia and America's foreign ministers are meeting for peace talks. Without Ukraine, without the Europeans.
That peace talks for Ukraine are now being held between Russia and the US, that doesn't change my seeing Russia as our main threat. That threat doesn't stem from the war taking place in Ukraine. It stems from the fact that the Russian armed forces are currently undergoing massive rearmament and being directed west.
The West is bracing for a possible attack. It would be Russia's second major war.
As long as Ukraine is fighting, it's relatively unlikely that Putin will move against the Baltics. I wouldn't rule it out. We shouldn't rule anything out, but it's relatively unlikely. As I see it, that means we should be doing everything we can to strengthen Ukraine so it doesn't lose that fight.
What matters now is proving that Ukraine can rely upon Germany's support. That's the only way to show that a fight waged against a Russian aggressor can actually be won here.
For 3 years now, it's been impossible to reach Kyiv by airplane. In a darkened train compartment, Breuer is briefed thoroughly before every meeting.
General, this is the third visit to Ukraine. The first was immediately after taking office, the second about 10 months ago. Our visit is certain to be noticed this time. This visit comes just ahead of the third anniversary of the full-scale invasion. There will be quite a high number of visitors.
All the more now, after the Munich Security Conference.
We're not permitted to film the rest of the briefing. Laying a wreath with Martin Jäger, German ambassador in Kyiv.
This memorial wall dates from the early days of the war. It starts from 2014. Today, it would be impossible to hang up a picture of every person who has fallen. It would be a wall all the way down to the Maidan.
With everything done on a highly strategic level, with all the political guidelines that shape military action, one thing must always be kept clear. At the end of the line is a soldier risking their life to achieve a mission, to fight for freedom, to fight for peace.
In 2024 and again in 2025, Putin laid out his victory theory: to hold out longer than Ukraine, to achieve Russian objectives through a long war of attrition. That works on the assumption they can hold out longer than the Ukrainians and the Western support.
Germany is one of Ukraine's largest military supporters. In a secret Ukrainian factory building, General Breuer inspects German Gepard air defense tanks. They've just returned from fighting off Russian drone attacks, back for maintenance and repair. For Breuer, it's a moment to reconnect with his own past. He trained on the Gepard himself 40 years ago.
So this one, it's been from the battlefield.
You know, it's a strange feeling when you see this Gepard. I've been trained and educated on this one, and now you see it coming back from war and seeing that it has been successful.
It is very successful.
Yeah, well, and it's good personnel. There are good soldiers in there, and I know what I'm talking about, because it's not easy.
You know, Ukraine Army Gepard systems is called like a sniper air defense. Because
nice expression. Nice expression.
Very good. So we will do even better. Believe us.
I believe you, definitely.
I'm a trained Gepard man. Those successful takedowns of Shahed drones or cruise missiles you see marked up on the tanks, those are highly appreciated here. You see it over and over in Kyiv. They need them every single day. Just last night there was another missile alert. One of the biggest demands is for enough air defense weapons to protect the populace. I think that tops the list.
howitzers, artillery ammunition, air defense. For 3 years, Germany has been supplying far more than decommissioned tanks from old stables.
That was a strategic decision. I think it was the right one. It's of course a double challenge to get one's own armed forces combat ready while also supplying Ukraine. It's a mammoth task.
A trip to the US is scheduled. A visit between partners. Shortly after the Munich Security Conference, General Breuer's counterpart was fired. Abruptly, no official explanation.
General Braun's reassignment was certainly swift. I wasn't able to discuss it with him further.
What exactly are you hoping for?
At the moment, as the German press is saying, America seems to be focusing more on theaters outside Europe. And that's what I want to hear about. How concrete these rumors I'm hearing actually are.
What could they lead to? Relations between the US and Germany are strained. The Americans are demanding higher defense spending, more responsibility, from other European partners too. At the Pentagon, Carsten Breuer meets his interim counterpart. That conversation between the two generals, top secret. Meetings like this are inevitably diplomatic, influenced by the soldiers' own collegial culture. Even so, an impression can be made, from the nuances, the mood, and even in how many advisors are in the room.
The atmosphere of the meeting was very intense. It really was an incredibly positive, friendly atmosphere. Our conversation today once again showed what counts, that we take on more responsibility. We, as in Germany, but also Europe. The Bundeswehr, Germany's armed forces, have a special task and role in that. We also showed the American side that we're doing our homework.
That all doesn't play that big a role, because politics comes first in the US too. If Trump says NATO is finished and we're pulling out, then the top American commander, the Joint Chief of Staff, will stand at attention and do it. That's why what matters isn't what Carsten Breuer and his colleague in Washington discuss behind closed doors. What matters is the Trump administration and its orders.
Berlin. A talk show appearance. Since taking office in spring of 2023, Carsten Breuer has given numerous interviews in newspapers and on television.
You might say he's the uniformed face of the armed forces. If we want the Bundeswehr to have more presence, which we do, if we want people to become aware again of what it stands for and its mission, then the soldiers must become visible. And therefore also soldier number one. That's what he's doing.
In many parts of Germany, the military has been largely invisible for years now. General Breuer wants to change that.
I see my task as being that of a communicator too. Of course, that has to do with the times we're living in. We're facing a major external threat. As I see it, we still don't have enough of the public's attention about that.
What's the main message?
The message is, yes, we're under threat, but yes, we can do something about it.
With media attention on the rise, skepticism has grown. Combat readiness, Russia as the enemy, 2029. Many are worried.
Some people do close their eyes to it all and fall into a kind of gazing at the past. If only we had the situation we did 10 years ago, maybe even 8, we'd all be better off.
There always has to be room for doubt in a liberal democracy. I mean, where do we live? Debate, disagreement, struggling for the best argument, that's all essential to democracy. That's why the Inspector General has to step up time and again to advocate for that course.
Good evening. Hello, Mr. Breuer. Mr. Mazala, feel free to stay seated. We've heard a few worst-case scenarios, maybe even a major war next year. What's the best-case scenario?
To have a stable, secure environment, which comes through deterrence. So everything we discussed when it comes to armament, that creates the basis for defense capability, for deterrence. And that's the stability we'll need over the coming years.
Peace through deterrence, deterrence through rearmament. It's a formula that has unsettled some in General Breuer's audience. Some see society becoming militarized. Do you understand those who now say that warmongers, yourself included, are summoning up a conflict with Russia and we should be talking more about diplomacy?
As long as they engage with me and with our arguments, that is, to engage with the facts, I can follow the accusations and the basis for discussion. But we have to base it on facts. We can't have those talks solely on the level of feeling.
An engagement at the federal president's Berlin residence. Carsten Breuer has been invited in for a conversation. Breuer is not only military advisor to the federal government, he also offers counsel to Germany's president, the state of the troops, intelligence findings, the enemy situation. All compiled in a red folder.
You ask about the red folder. Those documents are, of course, classified. I'm not going to go into that with you fully now. I believe there are good reasons to classify some information secret. Of course, I'd rather talk openly about it. I'm often at a point where I say, actually, you should talk about this now, then it will be clear to everyone straight away. But it isn't the moment for it. That can really weigh upon me.
Please have a seat. It's good you're here. These topics are still with us in their changing state. I can imagine that in at least one aspect you'll feel a bit more relaxed in today's conversation, the financing for the Bundeswehr.
In one question or another, certainly.
I'd think so. Of course, though, we must turn to the topic of Ukraine. I personally would like to talk about something in particular, 70 years of NATO.
The framework within which the Inspector General works is set by politics and is constantly shifting.
Carsten Breuer is in a power relationship where there are serious forces at work, with the minister, with the state secretaries, with a party that might not follow his advice. As Inspector General, you can't just say, this is how we're doing it. That's just not how it works.
At this turning point, though, politics is increasingly following the advice of the military. Nonetheless, the Bundeswehr remains a political instrument, shaped and equipped by Parliament. It has only as much agency as the government affords it. Do you ever think I should have demanded more directly, said we absolutely have to do something now?
I ask myself that every day. I think about it over and over. How will people look back at us one day? But I'd always say you have to consider it in context. A tremendous amount has been achieved. We have to consider where we've actually come from and what's changed.
In spring of 2025, German military spending was freed of its previous debt cap. A few years before, that would have been unimaginable.
Our own policy's top priority is the strengthening of the Bundeswehr. In the future, the federal government will provide all financial resources the Bundeswehr needs in order to become the strongest conventional army in Europe.
If Germany pulls this off well, it could empower many other partners. If in this phase Germany hits a brick wall with our dysfunctional procurement processes, we'll take those others down with us.
Germany's partners in the Baltics are watching the Bundeswehr restructuring closely. An entire German brigade, some 5,000 soldiers, are set to be stationed here in Lithuania within 2 years. With the barracks still being built, the first soldiers are already on site for Carsten Breuer's visit. Provisional headquarters in a startup building, in the heart of the capital city.
This is the printing process, General. Captain Behrens is a master printer.
You do this as a hobby?
Among other things, for 3 years now.
Did this come through official channels?
Unfortunately not, but
We also have official ones.
Including drones?
next month we'll also be making drones. That's General Huber's vision. We're discussing it.
That's good. So quiet here. Come on, let's get started.
General, once again, welcome to the 45th Armored Brigade. The goal is that by the end of 2027, the brigade is operational, combat-ready for defense, standing by on the eastern flank if necessary. General, we begin all our briefings with the enemy situation. You know the overall situation, which forces we expect in the event of an armed confrontation with the Russian Federation. Of course, we're not alone. We're part of the 10th Armored Division. We're part of NATO. We have other allies here. We stand side by side with our Lithuanian partners. But we know exactly why we are here. We'll go into that a bit more in the second part of the briefing. The specifics on drones, reconnaissance, and so on.
German soldiers in Lithuania. More than anything, it sends a political signal to Moscow.
For me, a worst-case scenario always comes down to Russia trying to break down NATO's cohesion. If you do that, you open Europe up, both geographically and politically.
NATO units regularly rehearse that scenario. Vilnius is less than 30 kilometers from Belarus, Russia's close ally. Experts assume that the most likely place Russia might challenge NATO is here in the Baltics. Now, in mid-May, thousands of soldiers are practicing defensive operations against Russian troops.
Slide. Yeah, for this exercise, for sure we want to provide credible deterrence. Therefore, my intent is to participate in the Iron Wolf exercise with all units and subunits for these 2 weeks in the training area Geisenai to ensure combat readiness. Next slide.
The scenario, Russia attacking Lithuania along several axes.
Training for 3 days here in this.
Suddenly, the exercise is interrupted. A Russian military aircraft has approached the Lithuanian border.
I want to emphasize on one real thing. So, radio silence in all Lithuanian territory. So VHF is not possible, so we are going on J-chat as a primary means of communication during the counterattack.
We've currently interrupted the exercise because a Russian reconnaissance aircraft is flying over us. Naturally, we don't want to reveal what we're doing here. You want to leave as small an electronic signature as possible.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I would invite you to be with me on my tank.
Good day, comrades. Hello, Master Sergeant. Hello. Good day, comrades. Where do you want me? Here?
I need to start the engine in a moment. Could you move a bit to the side?
These are the Lithuanians here. And up front, the ones who just addressed you, those are the Brits. We've coordinated with them to practice this.
Do you see any risk that exercises like this could provoke a conflict?
I don't think so. Of course, any defensive measure can always be turned into something, in this case by Russia, that can be reinterpreted as an offensive. That happens time and again. When I look at the structure of the exercise here, though, and the scenario that underlies it, it's very clear to me. It's of a purely defensive nature.
Lithuania itself has about 15,000 soldiers. A German brigade of 5,000 soldiers makes a significant difference.
The basic concept is be able to fight so you don't have to fight. If we can signal more strongly our readiness to defend and our operational capability, ideally it deters an adversary from attacking. That's the whole idea behind deterrence.
Whether it really deters anyone, we don't know. I can only say as a historian, there have been many cases where deterrence had no effect, where dictators were determined to go to war. We can't read Putin's mind.
Speaking again with the general public. The Bundeswehr now has a new part to play in security policy discussions. Carsten Breuer seeks out dialogue in a way few before him have. Despite there being much, he still can't openly talk about.
What do you make of certain political figures saying we should be trying harder to talk with Russia again?
You don't solve conflict militarily. The military can only create a framework. Military solutions only hold for a certain period. Within that, you can create a framework for diplomacy to take over. I'm convinced that in our situation, we can only argue from a position of strength, and that we'll only be listened to in that position of strength.
Since our filming ended, Europe has experienced repeated drone sightings, cyber attacks, and airspace violations, all attributed to Russia.